Chinese came up originally from California, following the California gold rush, up to the Barkerville area in Western Canada in the late 1850s for the gold rush at that time. So the history of the migration of the Chinese, it goes back a very long way, and Chinese have been going overseas for centuries. Based on legend, in the mid-4th century, Chinese Buddhist monks landed in Western Canada. But the first recorded arrival of the Chinese was in the late 1700s with Captain John Mears, who was a British sea captain. And he brought over a crew of Chinese from Hong Kong in search of beaver pelts, because at that time, trimming women's hats with beaver fur was in vogue. You need to understand the past to appreciate the present and to see where you're going down the road. History gives you a sense of identity, and when we learn about the contributions of the community, who the historical figures were, you recognize that not only, did the Chinese have a very long history in this country, but they were an integral part of shaping this country. They played a key role in the development of society and community, in law, in politics, in medicine, every single aspect of Canadian society. Many people don't realize that we have had pioneer lawyers in the Chinese community. The first lawyer called to the bar was Dora Nipp, and he was called to the bar in 1946, followed by Greta Wong Grant, the first Chinese woman to practice law, 1947. Then there was Andy Zhou, 1953, Douglas Jung, 1954, and Margaret G., the first Chinese woman called to the bar in BC, and that's 1955. Dora Nipp was instrumental, together with Irving Himmel, in repealing the Exclusion Act. Okay? Greta Wong Grant set up the legal aid system for London. Douglas Jung was first Chinese Canadian member of Parliament. He was a war vet and a practicing lawyer. Andy Zhou was a very well-known figure in Vancouver, and like all the other lawyers that I've mentioned, Andy and Douglas Jung, Dora Nipp, Greta Grant, Margaret G., they all contributed to the community. They, in order to be called to the bar, they had to break through the color bar to study law. They had to break through the color bar to practice law, and they never forgot where they came from. They continued in their practice of law to put back into the community, to put back into their own community. So we owe great debt to that generation. The redress movement holds a lot of lessons for today's generation. One of the key lessons is that we need to remain vigilant when we're pursuing valuable goals. People who don't understand history think of history as a straight line. They think of it as a process, instead of understanding the progress. Those who think that yesterday's problems have been resolved don't understand that we relive those problems in other incarnations. Unless you understand history, and unless you can draw on the strengths of the pioneers, the war vets, the activists of the past, then you run the risk of missing recurring themes and dangers. You can't afford to be apolitical. Okay? To be apolitical means that you're going to run the risk of losing all the gains. And for that reason, it's really important to understand redress, understand the community's history. From a legal perspective, what the redress movement has taught us is how fragile and inadequate the law and legal assurances are. If we want to maintain those values that are inherent in the legislation we have, such as the Charter, the Multiculturalism Act, human rights legislation, we can't afford not to be vigilant.